Skyline Wilderness Park is a beautiful 850-acre swath of countryside located in Napa, California. It offers an amazing range of recreational opportunities: horseback riding, disc golf, archery, hiking, nature education, and our favorite activity, mountain biking. But it only takes one visit to realize that the past has a presence here. Mysterious ruins are tucked into the hills and along the outskirts of the park. Some appear to be 20th century. Others might be older. My goal was to see what I could learn about these structures. Why are they here? What was their purpose? I read Preston Ary's excellent book, combed through digital newspaper archives from the 1800s, and visited the Napa County Historical Society, which is a mini museum unto itself. The history of this area is fascinating, and more than a little bit haunting. And it all goes back to Imola. Napa. When you hear that word, what do you think? Well, wine, of course. It's hard to imagine a time when Napa Valley wasn't synonymous with delicious fermented grape juice. There was an era, however, when the phrase "going to Napa" didn't mean you were going wine tasting. Instead, it meant that you had probably lost your mind. Let me explain. During the mid-1800s, the state of California had a crisis. The state's first insane asylum, which began operating in Stockton in 1853, was desperately overcrowded. Originally designed to accommodate 600 patients, it housed more than double that number in 1873. You see, the gold rush of the 1850s had taken its toll on the population. There was the sheer influx of people. The gold rush was the largest mass migration in U.S. history. It was accompanied by disease, malnutrition, alcoholism, and depression. Some have speculated that mercury, which was commonly used in the extraction of gold, also contributed to the rising cases of mental illness. So a commission was established to find a site for a new asylum that would take the pressure off of Stockton. And that site turned out to be Napa. Cayetano Juarez, a Californio who owned Rancho Tuluque in southeast Napa, sold around 200 acres for the purpose of building this new asylum. It came to be called Imola, after a scenic town in Italy that also had an asylum. Work on the main building began in 1872. It was an absolutely massive structure. Dubbed the Castle, this Victorian palace took 10 million red bricks and 7 years to finish. Now, the physical layout of the asylum castle, believe it or not, was intended to be therapeutic. This stemmed from a movement called moral therapy. Moral therapy proposed that patients be given compassion, dignity, and a pleasant environment with fresh air and activities. A contributor to this movement, physician Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride, promoted architecture as therapy. The floor plan of Kirkbride buildings, as they came to be called, looked something like this. It was called the Batwing Plan. The design was meant to provide maximum fresh air and sunlight to the wards. More difficult patients were kept in the farthest wings, and as they improved, they were moved closer to the center of the building, where administrative services were located. In this picture of the Napa Asylum, you can see its batwing shape. Physical activity was also prescribed as a part of moral therapy, and the Napa Asylum was well equipped to provide it. Patients excavated the lakes, they harvested fruits and vegetables, and raised livestock on site. In some ways, the asylum was a town unto itself, and it was the defining feature of Napa for decades. Over the years, the acreage expanded to more than 2,000 at its peak, and there were more than 300 structures at one point. But it didn't last. The castle was declared a fire trap and demolished in 1950. A more practical building took its place. Currently hidden behind a high-security perimeter, the facility, now called Napa State Hospital, treats mostly forensic patients. By 1979, the land next to the hospital was declared a surplus and leased to a group of citizens organized as the Skyline Park Citizens Association. I sat down with Doyce, who's been with the park for 30 years, to ask him about the park's founding.
And what happened, from what I understand, the city started putting pressure on the hospital with the thought that the hospital is taking away from the economy downtown. So as a result of that, I guess the state decided, well, okay, we'll back out with everything we've been doing and turn it over to a lot of the things that the city could offer, even like water. As time went on, it was decided that maybe the state was getting ready to sell it off as excess for development. So there was a group of people. Now, Katie, on this, I can't really be too sure, but of who the people were. But I think it was a lot of horse people. So they decided that they would want to take that to Sacramento and asked permission to make this a park. And from what I understand, Sacramento thought, well, how are you going to finance it? The state kind of gave them a horse laugh a little bit and said, well, you can't make that work. You know how that goes. Finally, it was decided that the state would give it a try. Let this Citizens Association give it a try. But the hang-up was that Sacramento, or the state government, could not lease the property to an independent group. What it was is, I guess the state is not allowed to lease the property to an independent group, but they could lease it to another government agency. Napa County got involved and decided, well, they could be that government agency.
Doyce went on to describe how there was no RV park, no archery, no disc golf in those early years, which meant no income.
Things weren't working out too well, financially, because we didn't have any income as far as the RV park. So it almost closed. The park almost went under.
Today, the park has over 25 miles of trails to explore, with numerous picnic areas for refueling between adventures. They also have RV accommodations. Friendly folks from all over come to visit, like Dale and Melinda here.
You met us, and we're the nicest people.
Mountain bikers consider the park to be a first-class destination, with plenty of technical rock features and the tools to perform bike repairs should they be needed. On the park's northern edge is an 18-hole disc golf course that attracts regular tournaments. Arrayed among the hills, it has a reputation for being challenging. And adjacent to it is a 22-acre archery range, where the Silverado Archery Club hosts a number of tournaments each year for both target archers and hunters. Founded in 1954 and NFAA chartered, it's one of the top archery ranges in Northern California. So what I'd like to do now is connect the park to its past as part of Napa's historic asylum. In and around Skyline, some remnants of the past are obvious. For example, if you've parked off of Streblow Drive, and connected to the River to Ridge Trail, did you notice the 1940s incinerator near the corner? These were used to burn garbage and lawn waste and were later banned. Some past remnants are incredibly subtle. For example, at the end of River to Ridge is a kiosk. Turn around and you'll see a couple of palm trees. Now, what are palm trees doing in the middle of a forest dominated by oak and buckeye? There must have been some structure there at one point. So now let me share with you what I learned about the park. There are 4 categories I would like to cover. First, we'll cover stone walls, followed by water features. We'll then talk about the structures along Lake Murray Road. Finally, we tie up a few loose ends. If you keep your eyes peeled, there are walls all over the park, each built with rocks that appear to be local to the area. And that makes sense. Why haul rocks any further than you have to? The Manzanita Trail crosses one of these walls. Just look at how far it goes. No mortar was used in its construction, just carefully stacked stones. The Manzanita Wall is so prominent that it's visible by satellite, which made me wonder, just how extensive is it? And how many other walls are visible by satellite? So I looked at Google Maps and marked all the walls I could find. Here's the one on Manzanita. And now check out all of these others. These are only the most prominent ones. Imagine how many others there are hidden among the trees. So can we draw any conclusions about how old they are or who built them? One question we could ask is whether any of these walls predate California statehood. Before 1850, Napa was a collection of ranchos like Rancho Tulaque. But after 1850, the land got divided up into a grid, essentially, as you can see in this 1876 map. That made me curious to see how closely the walls line up with these property lines. So I created a tracing of the boundaries on the map. And as reference points, I traced the major rivers in blue, the railroad in green, and this ridge line to the east with yellow dots. If you lay this on top of the walls, this is what you get. It's not perfect, but we are taking a very old hand-drawn map and laying it on top of a satellite image. There seems to be a decent correlation. But it's difficult to conclude too much about this, however, other than the walls probably don't predate California statehood. Curiously, there's an outlier here, which is curved and on a hillside near the basalt mines. So who built the walls? I didn't find anything concrete on this except for one tantalizing clue. This photo, which says Rock City 1966, made by one patient over many years, near basalt in hills. Who was this patient? Where is their handiwork located? We can only guess. For the asylum to be self-supporting, an ample supply of water was needed. The asylum started on 200 acres of land, and to the east were 2 plots owned by Nathan Coombs, the founder of Napa City. It looks like Coombs had a generous agreement with the asylum to allow access to his water. Also in 1872, the Coombs Ranch Dam was constructed, somewhere near a bend in Murray Creek. But the growing asylum needed more. In the 1880s, Superintendent Dr. Wilkins directed the construction of 3 lakes on the property. Lake Camille, which was originally called Lake Camilla after Dr. Wilkins' wife, was the first lake to be constructed in 1885. A broad avenue lined with beautiful trees was created, which connected the castle with Lake Camille. That is probably today's Madrone Drive. The dam that established Lake Louise, originally called Lake Lucerne, was completed in 1888. And the dam for the largest lake, which is Lake Como, was finished in 1890. Just south of Lake Louise is a low-lying area that's fenced off. It doesn't look like much, but this is the bed of Lake Como. At some point, the asylum started using it as a dumping ground, as you can see on this map. Along its edges, you can see the garbage that sank into what was once mud. Interestingly, these lakes were built almost entirely using patient labor. And sadly, Lake Camille, for whatever reason, was involved in a spate of patient suicides by drowning in the early 1900s. The sides of Lake Camille were said to drop off steeply from a depth of 10 feet to 50 feet within a short distance. Now, you've probably seen this structure in Lake Louise that resembles a crypt. That is the Lake Como pump house. It directed water from Lake Como into Lake Louise. Water could also flow from Louise and Como into Lake Camille. Later, in 1908, yet another lake was created, this one about 2 miles east of the castle. You're all probably familiar with Lake Marie. Interesting story about Lake Marie. In the early 1900s, the asylum's medical superintendent, a Dr. Elmer E. Stone, had a bungalow built near the lake. He stocked Lake Marie with more than 100,000 trout, and according to news reports, he used this bungalow as a private hunting and fishing lodge. He maintained the property with state funds and entertained friends there using food purchased with state funds and prepared by asylum employees. On top of this, Dr. Stone was accused of embezzling money from the asylum's hay fund, among other things. He resigned in 1912. Okay, to finish the section on water, we need to discuss this. You're probably wondering, what does the old chimney on Skyline have to do with water? There have been a lot of theories about this structure. The current map calls it a mining cabin foundation. I found no evidence for this, unfortunately. And back in the 1990s, some thought it was a sea captain's house. An older version of the Skyline map backs this up, though the location is a bit off. But again, I found nothing to corroborate this. The answer comes from a 1982 newspaper article interviewing Ellen Brannock. Brannock was the Napa State Hospital historian for decades, so I put a lot of stock in what she says. Brannock said that this was the dam watchman's house. Someone lived here and monitored Lake Marie Dam. By 1920, the water in Lake Marie was no longer needed. It was supplanted by the Rector Reservoir in Yountville. So, the dam watchman's house was moved. It was physically relocated to the hospital grounds, where it was eventually replaced with the Francis Cottage. That might not be all, though. I think there's a Dr. Stone connection here as well. An article defending Stone in 1912 said that his bungalow was merely a shack, made from refuse lumber left over from the construction of the Lake Marie Dam. And the building, it was said, was really just intended for the watchman at the dam. And in 1920, an article describes a structure being moved from Lake Marie. The term they used for it, interestingly, was bungalow. Lake Murray Road is like an artery running through the center of the park. It starts at the lower lakes, runs parallel to Murray Creek for 2 miles, and ends at Lake Murray. Now I'd like to start at the top by Lake Murray and work our way down. Not far from the lake is a massive rock formation. I can barely get it in the frame of my camera. Some people think it's the Asylum Crematorium. It's not, but it sure grabs your attention. It has 3 chambers. The middle chamber has this very odd recessed area. I would almost describe it as a mock window. And between the middle and right-hand chambers near the back is a hand-carved doorway. You can see the chisel marks. This was done laboriously by hand. If you look closely, the back wall has some writing on it.
I think it says D-I-E-L. Deal. And then there's a 57 below it. I don't see an 18 or a 19 or... So looking at it a little more closely, it's grown over with moss, but there's a 3 here. It's pretty clear. That might be 1. 3, 1, 5, 7. 3, 1, 5, 7. Huh. Maybe there's more down here. Hard to say.
I'd be very curious if Deal was an asylum patient. Were patients assigned 4-digit numbers by any chance? A 1982 article suggests this was a test quarry for a dam on South Tualaca Creek. If it was a quarry, heck, maybe it was used to build the next thing down the road, which is really close by. Take one more look at this feature. Do you see the half octagon? Remember that, because you're going to see this shape echoed in the next structure. Continuing on, things get a little morbid. There seems to be a lot of confusion about this structure. The old park map calls it a crematorium. And it sure looks like one. Clearly, something was burned here. There's still a fragment of metal sheeting attached. There may be a second opening on the right, but it appears to have deteriorated. Now, the asylum did have a crematorium. It operated between 1924 and 1964, processing 5,100 cremations, or about 2 to 3 per week. But is this really the asylum crematorium? There's a document that sheds light on this question on the website Calisphere. It's a 1930s photo album of asylum buildings, which was submitted to the state government for funding purposes. It documents everything from this spacious physician's residence to this tiny isolation cottage. The surprise comes on page 292. There's a little house on a grassy lawn surrounded by a wire fence. The building's designation is crematorium. Built in 1923, it fits the historical record. So then, what do we have here? I asked Doyce what he thought.
I don't really think that was a crematorium, but I have heard that, the same thing that you're talking about, that was a crematorium. And the reason I don't think that was a crematorium, because If you look at that, one of them looks like a kitchen. It's got a table in there, and the thing that you talked about with the stovepipe coming out, I think that's where they did the cooking, for the crew that built the dam.
Where did you hear that?
Where did I hear that? Maybe I didn't hear it. Maybe I just assumed that, because it don't look like a crematorium to me.
I can kind of see it as a cookhouse. But was that its original function? It has these weird little ports and nooks. Its proximity to the presumptive quarry and to Lake Marie suggests both structures had a role in the construction of the Lake Marie Dam. But until further documentation surfaces, we don't know for sure. As we approach the bottom of Lake Marie Road, there are a couple of caves. One is very dark and creepy. A hiking book claims this one is natural. The other cave is shallow, and there's a wet spot by it all the time. Turns out that's an underground spring, and this cave was dug to find its source. In the early years of the asylum, when water sources were limited, lots of caves were dug in the surrounding hills to collect every gallon of water possible. I found a fun cave story, and who knows, maybe it pertains to one of these caves. So in the late 1800s, a group of patients were allowed to live in their own houses on the grounds, rather than in the main building. Peter Russell was one such fellow. He dug a cave for himself, equipped it with a chimney, and lived in it year-round. He was quite a talented trapper, and hung 500 squirrel skin trophies outside his home. What a show-off. So if you ever find a cave with a chimney and maybe a few squirrel bones inside, you'll know what it is. In this section, we have a few loose ends. First up is the Thatcher Rimrock Trail. Now, after doing all this research on the asylum, I wondered, was Thatcher a patient who wandered the hills? Or perhaps a former landowner? Turns out the trail was named after Ken Thatcher.
I had the greatest pleasure of my life working with Ken Thatcher. He was a great man. I don't know how much history you know about Ken Thatcher. Ken Thatcher was an old mountain man, and he was raised in Montana, and he was a paratrooper in World War II, and he was quite a person. And he was pretty rough. He was. I never did try to keep up with him when I was a young man. And he was something. So anyway, he was the original trail manager of Skyline Park. When the park first came about, he decided he was going to build the Rimrock Trail. Mm-hmm. Everybody said, "Well, you're crazy. There's no way you can get a trail up that way." And he just kept on, and he was just had that determination that he was going to do that just to show people that they were wrong. And if you know it that very well, that trail is very narrow there on that rocky point, and that was all hand done with a 5-pound sledgehammer and a cold chisel in order to get that shelf in there on that rocky point. And as you well know, that faces the south, and that sun just beats down in there. I mean, it's really hot in the summer. It was tough, very tough. The fact that we had to walk in, sometimes it took so long to get in there that we didn't really have a whole lot of time, to do anything. So we had to camp out. So the horse lady would bring food up to us.
Wow. Second, over by the Martha Walker Garden are these concrete pads. We like goofing off on them on our bikes. It's funny, but these are where the asylum chicken coops were kept. The Skyline Association once considered turning them into shuffleboards. And our third loose end is whatever the heck this is. My biggest disappointment during this entire project was that I didn't find a lick of information on this building. But let's do a quick little exploration and see if we can figure it out. So you have a building with 3 chutes. It looks like you load up the hopper, maybe hang a container below, and then discharge the contents into it. They appear to be hand-operated, but the handles are beyond my reach. So maybe there used to be a raised platform here? You guys know what it is?
Oh no, do you?
No.
I was just guessing like a coal chute.
Yeah. I thought, yeah.
It seems like to get rid of something.
I like those answers. Let's ascend the hill behind the building. Let's see if there's anything up here. Oh wow. There's a retaining wall maybe? Okay, let's get a closer look at this thing. So this is really interesting. I don't know what it is, but somebody might. Reverse Google image searches on this thing are useless. Believe me, I've tried. My husband thinks it's a winch. I think it might be a spool for a belt. If it used to spin, it sure doesn't now. I turned around and looked inside the building. There's a great clue here. It has partitions. That means each chute was meant to dispense something different. The floor slopes downwards, which would make whatever material that was in here slide towards the opening. There's also a slide here pointing towards the middle unit, and something was bolted onto this pedestal. The spool lies directly behind it. There's another pedestal here. Something bolted up here. Something big. There's some big bolts. Let's keep climbing. Okay. Let's see if we can get a little higher. Oh, there it is. Back here is a quarry run by Sire Industries. Now remember all this because I want to take a quick detour to Angel Island. On the west side of the island is a vein of serpentine. And not too far away is an old building. Look familiar? This is a 1930s rock crushing plant. Chunks of rock from the nearby quarry were fed into this crusher. Notice the concrete pedestal it's bolted onto. The crushed rock was conveyed to a screen above, which sorted different sized rocks into the building's compartments. It was used to pave the roads around the island. And there are other examples like this. Here's an ore processing building at the abandoned New Idria mine. As you can see, it's made of layered concrete, just like the one at Skyline. So I think our mystery building could be a rock crushing and sorting plant. Rock may have been conveyed from the quarry to a crusher mounted here, and then screened into these compartments based on size, and dispensed through the chutes into elevated carts. So who ran this facility originally? There were many private interests operating behind the asylum at various points in time. The most prominent was the Basalt Rock Company, headed by Al Streblo. The company started operating in 1920 and was purchased in the 80s by Sire Industries. In fact, their original quarry is probably marked in this Sire document. Zoom in and you'll see an area marked Old Quarry, remarkably close to our mystery building. So I think it's clear we have a mining building here. Whether it was owned by the Basalt Rock Company, however, is an open question. I have one final topic, and it might be the most important. Let's go back to the crematorium. Remember we said it started operating in 1924. Well, what happened before 1924? Patients who died at the asylum were buried on the hospital grounds. The official number of patients buried on site is 4,368. Where might they be located? Turns out that information is hard to come by. Only a small number of articles touch upon this subject, and here's what they say. A woman looking for the grave of a relative who died at the asylum initially was met with a royal runaround. Since the last patients were buried there in 1924, the site has been stripped of markers and treated shabbily, its original use forgotten. At Napa State, the only cemetery sign is a low granite marker at a wrong location further up the road. Fortunately, there's a clue to the site of the burials in the Napa Valley Register article from 2008. A ground-penetrating radar survey was conducted in a field behind the hospital in order to locate the patients buried there. The picture in the article shows a man holding the results of the survey. Behind him is the field in which the survey was conducted. The building off in the distance is outlined in his printout, and as you can see, the burials are very dense on either side of it. I didn't recognize this building, but it has a distinctive feature. It has 2 round red chimneys. I looked for something like this on Google Maps, and here it is. It's located on Madrone Drive at the back of the hospital. By my count, there are only 200 to 250 burials around this building. To the east is a large stretch of undeveloped land. I suspect this is where at least some of the more than 4,000 remaining patients are located. But is that the whole story? On a trip to the archives, I found a ledger from 1895. It lists cemeteries, plural, with a 2 next to it. Where might this second cemetery be located? I found one small clue from 1888. During a board meeting, there was disagreement over where to build a cemetery. A Dr. Gahey recommended it be placed along the railroad across from the asylum. A Mr. Delger opposed the idea, and that's it. I could find no resolution to this discussion. So we have the area south of Madrone Drive where ground-penetrating radar surveys found burials, and possibly the land across from the asylum near the railroad tracks. This area is now owned by Napa Valley College. Intriguingly, it remains undeveloped, and there's a portion that is fenced off. Whether the asylum actually used this land as a burial ground remains a mystery for now. But there is one other location that may have been a cemetery. And guess who knows where it is? Deuce. It's just west of Trabajo Lane, where it meets Imola Avenue. Product Services and Industries.
Yes. See, all of this area down here is all hospital property. This whole swath,
Yeah.
from the highway all the way up to Skyline Park, was all. And this is where the cattle, or the milk cows, used to graze when I first moved into this house. They would be grazing right here in this big open meadow area.
Oh.
And so at one time, this was all state hospital doings.
This area out here behind me, it's been told to me that there's actually patients from the old asylum buried out in this area.
This
And
little plot here.
This little plot here.
The good news is that as of the making of this video, these patients will no longer be forgotten. A memorial with the names of those who died at the institution is scheduled to be built just off Madrone Drive. This concludes our tour of the park and its history. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly had a lot of fun researching it. What I love about Skyline is that every time you visit, you discover something new. Whether it's a piece of history or a beautiful view. I think Melinda Radford says it best.
It's a great place to just pop over and escape.